When I introduce you, I always say football finance expert, former financial advisor to Manchester City. And I'm looking at the fans of many clubs who are saying, what about City? What about City? Because they want to know what's going to happen to Manchester City. The other day in studio with myself and Simon, Stefan, was Peter Moore, the former Liverpool chief executive. And on this subject, he was pretty diplomatic about what may or may not await City.
Look, I'm not surprised that there's 115 charges because there wouldn't be those charges if there wasn't something that the Premier League felt needed investigating. I can't speak to any of these charges. I think you remember the kind of WikiLeaks stuff that started to come out of Germany a few years ago, and I think that put fuel on the fire. The Premier League's got to do what the Premier League has to do. I'm proud of what we achieved, running our club in a safe, self-sustainable manner. Trent again talked about it, and I learned this from the owners. And when I started to understand what financial fair play was, I'm a video game guy that gets thrust into this. And John Henry, if he was sat here, would tell you they bought the club based on the premise that everybody would adhere to rules. I'm not saying anything about any other club here. I want to make that very clear. But it was absolutely beaten into me that we're going to do this right. We're going to drive our revenues. We're going to take full advantage of our global reach. And I came up with this phrase. It was very clear to me from the get-go. We're a club that has a global pulse powered by this massive local heart.
So Peter Moore, the former chief exec, Stefan, was pretty diplomatic when he was in here. Now, that's fine. But when are we going to hear what awaits City? And what does await City?
Well, he wasn't that diplomatic, was he? I mean, if you read between the lines, it's very clear what he was saying. So, I thought he spoke really well. And clearly, the position that he had at Liverpool was different from the position that City found themselves in upon the takeover in 2008. So he did have that privilege of having one of the world's largest football clubs to play with. So I don't think it's a similar situation. City were obviously in a growth phase and did what they needed to do. Now, whether they've breached any rules, we will find out in due course. There's no rush in my mind, because if you go around making allegations as serious as has been made against the club, they must be given the opportunity to defend themselves, and they must also have a forum that is appropriate to the level of allegation that's been made. And as I've said to you many times, the allegations that are made against City are the most serious that are imaginable in the business world. They are allegations, effectively, that the accounts are wrong for 10 years. And if the accounts are wrong for 10 years and have been deliberately misrepresented and made wrong by false contracts with sponsors and other parties, then clearly there will be nowhere to hide.
But there was also an obligation upon the football fraternity. I understand the assertions that you're making, but sport operates in a different place and has different ramifications from it than other businesses. So whilst we compare outcomes for what you are able to defend yourself with, to take 2, 3, and maybe even 4 years to get an outcome, from my mind, compromises the sport itself. And so there should be slightly different parameters. And we have seen Manchester City, whether it's trying to deny the media access to court hearings, or what they did. The Daily Mail went into court and got it overturned.
Both the Premier League and the club both wanted those hearings to be kept secret. It was a joint position between the Premier League and the club.
Irrespective of whether the Premier League...
Well, not irrespective. It's a very important distinction.
It may well be that at that particular moment in time, the two agendas aligned. But Manchester City would have been very happy with that agenda and very motivated by it. And we look at some of the arguments that are being made by Manchester City and some of the discussions I've heard you recently having with various other people. And some of the things that are underneath the bonnet are relatively ridiculous, making assertions about what their stadium rights are worth at £15 million when we know that that's not representative of the value. I think Manchester City, and I think for the good of football, and for the good of the well-being of the structure of the Premier League, that this case shouldn't be allowed to drag on because Manchester City have enormous legal resource. And I'll be also interested to see how Manchester City and who is paying those legal bills and how those are being accounted for in Manchester City's accounts, because we're talking about a cottage industry being built up around what Man City are prepared to spend.
I think in short, Stephen, it shouldn't entitle them to a no-rush investigation.
No. Let me address the points that were made. First of all, the allegations that are made are personal allegations relating to a number of individuals, because you can't get to the point of what the allegations actually say in terms of sham contracts and everything else without actually finding that somebody was deliberately carrying out those actions and
Indeed.
therefore was acting illegally. It is also an allegation that certain people have perjured themselves at CAS, for example, and in other places. Again, these are very serious allegations. They can't just be dismissed by, oh, well, let's just expedite the whole thing because it's football. If you go round making allegations... Hang on, let me finish. If you go round making allegations that go way beyond the sport, then those individuals have to be given the platform to be able to defend themselves, and the club likewise has to be given that platform. Now, in terms of the points that you made around the Etihad contracts, those arguments have already been made and are not the arguments that are alleged. This is not a claim that certain of Manchester City's contracts were greater than fair value. UEFA themselves accepted, both at CAS and in 2014, that those contracts were for their fair value. And it was not put into play in CAS. The allegations that are made in the Premier League case are not around fair value. They're effectively saying that rather than the contracts being 60, 70 million pounds, that the contracts were only ever 8 million pounds, and that therefore the contracts that are accounted for in City's accounts are shams. Now, City must be given an opportunity to defend themselves, and it goes way beyond from the sporting perspective. No
one's disputing that.
Should that take forever?
Well, then we're in perfect agreement.
Should that take
we're
forever?
not, because
it has to take a very long time. If you were to look at a situation, there's a guy in the press at the moment, a guy called Mike Lynch of Autonomy. Very similar case. He's actually been extradited to the US.
It's slightly different.
It's not. It's a very similar level of allegation, and it involves a serious amount of money. And that case took many, many years, first of all. The judgment alone on that case was 1,500 pages long and took 2 years to come after the trial.
That's a false comparison, because I know not Mike Lynch. I know the business, and I know who bought it. I know who also owned it, which was the founder was one of my best friends.
Well,
so I know the
it's all public information.
So absolutely. But what we're talking about is a reasonable amount of time. Of course, Manchester City must be given a fair opportunity to defend themselves, and evidence that's come out afterwards about potentially conflicting information, what was and wasn't said in the Court of Arbitration and Sport, should also be given the opportunity to air. But I made a view about 2 months ago that this will take up into the mid-2020s, maybe even going further than that. You pushed back and said that's ridiculous.
No, I think you said 2030.
Yeah, I did. And I think by the time this comes to an adjudication, it'll probably be about 2026, 27. 3-4 years, to me, is far too long. Far too long.
It's too long, but don't go around making allegations.
To be that way. They're not making allegations. They're charging people with what they believe they have the evidence to prove.
Okay,
it was proven by UEFA, who have come out subsequently and said we were right in the first place.
We're going to have to wait.
And by the way, it's perfectly reasonable for them to raise the case that they want to raise. I don't think they've done it in a very clever way.
Yeah, absolutely.
But in this forum, they must be given the opportunity to defend themselves.
Stefan, thank you so much for your time. It's more time than you bargained for, but thank you so much. Stefan Borson with us live on talkSPORT.
On AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.